Hello and welcome to my presentation. My name is John Onyeaku, and I'm here to make the case for 3 recommendations for stopping employee flight at Locus Innovation. This is a multinational company that produces components for GPS system. The results from recent exit interviews show that work-life balance is a major problem at this company. So my presentation compares 2 systematic reviews using some benchmark tools. Those systematic reviews can be found in slide number 2, and they are flexible working and performance, a systematic review of the evidence for business case by De Menezes and Kelleher, while the second one is employee well-being and the HRM organizational performance relationship, a review of quantitative studies by Van der Voort, Powell, and Veldhoven. And from here, I proceed by showing the recommendations, which are number 1, to collaborate for the board to collaborate with employees in designing the flexible work arrangements. This is important. The essence of this collaboration is to give the employees some sense of belonging, some sense of independence, and some sense of authority. Number 2, the board should also implement this policy for all employees. The reason for this is because selectively applying this flexible work arrangement has been found to be ineffective by several studies. And lastly, to make sure that the board understands the benefit or sees the need for this type of policy, the board should sort of try to monitor the impact of flexible work arrangements on employee retention. How is the board going to do this? The board can authorize a longitudinal study to establish causality between a flexible work arrangement and employee retention. And from here, I then go ahead and show you the synthesis of multiple studies, and afterwards we showed rigor and transparency, and unusually I will follow that up with the limitations of the study. And reason for the inclusion of limitations of the study at this point is that it's a test of rigor and transparency. So part of the synthesis of these articles is analyze the extent of rigor and transparency that the authors show in each article. Since rigor and transparency conveys an awareness of the limitations of a study, I also show, like I said earlier, the limitations of each study after discussing rigor and transparency. Just to repeat, ordinarily a discussion about the limitations of a review would occur toward the end of the review, but here, since I'm discussing rigor and transparency, it makes sense to also discuss the limitations because it's a measure of rigor and transparency. I will get to this a little later. But back to the synthesis of multiple studies. Why is it important to synthesize multiple studies? Well, the essence of synthesis of multiple studies, as opposed to just making decisions based on a singular study, is to include a larger pool of available data. The synthesis of multiple studies makes it possible to include all empirical and available data, thereby giving a representative overview of the whole body of research on the subject. For example, in the Van der Voort, Powell, and Veldhoven article, this would mean a representative overview of the whole body of quantitative research on human resource management, employee well-being, and organizational performance. These were the 3 touch points of that study. With respect to De Menezes and Kelleher, this would mean a representative overview of the whole body of studies encompassing all conceptual and methodological issues related to flexible work arrangements to provide a basis for generalizations. Well, this was a major issue for both studies. Uh, they both stated that they couldn't generalize because of the diversity of their studies and the conclusions. There wasn't a unison of conclusions across the board. Continuing with the synthesis of multiple studies, de Menezes and Kelleher condensed flexible work arrangement terms into three areas of interest, and this consists of keywords, 5 key terms, and then they developed data as shown in table 3, page 457 of the article. On the other hand, Van der Voel, Powell, and Veldhoven, they use 5 study attributes, and they used articles only between 1995 and 2010, using 1995 as their base year. They also explain the reason for that somewhere in the article. And those articles cover HRM, Part 6, employee well-being, and organizational performance. And you can find this on table 1, page 396. The important thing from here is the results from their studies show that a 60% positive relationship between HRM and employee well-being and organizational performance. And this is all listed out in table 2, page 398 of the article. So, talking about rigor and transparency, what does that mean? Well, a study is rigorous if it ensures that review findings are credible, they are transferable, they are dependable, and they are confirmable. It is transparent when the processes and procedures and decisions are clear to any reader. And I break this out in three ways: the conceptual framework, the methodology, and then data analysis and findings. In terms of conceptual framework, both articles show clearly the purpose and boundary of their work. In other words, they tell us what they excluded and why they excluded those studies. Both articles seem to use aggregative systematic review. Well, I must make it clear here. It is very clear in the Menezes and Kelleher article that they use aggregative systematic review methodology. It is not so clear with respect to Van der Voel, Powell, and Veldhoven. Theirs seems to be exploratory in nature and therefore leads one to believe that they use a configurative systematic review. So like I said earlier, I list the limitations of the studies here because this is part of the tests, of the overall test of rigor, but more to the extent of transparency. So with respect to the Menezes and Kelleher, they talk about the conceptual issues or the conceptual problems with their studies when defining flexible work arrangements, and the problem with trying to synergize the bundles of flexible work arrangements. This also deals with the overall conceptual problem. There's lack of consistent measures across the board of flexible work arrangements, and this leads to different measures. In other words, there was no consistency among the studies with respect to how to measure flexible work arrangements. And lastly, they talk about the lack of distinction between formal and informal flexible work arrangements, and this further leads to lack of clarity in understanding the real effects of flexible work arrangements. Well, the issue here is they seem to be saying that the boundary line between formal and informal flexible flexible work arrangements has become blurred so much in literature that it is so difficult to make that distinction between them. With respect to Van der Waals, Powell, and Veldhoven, they use a narrative review, but they also acknowledge the fact that there is a variation of measures used to assess HRM, well-being, and performance. This is similar to the observation in the Menezes and Kelleher. They used only quantitative studies, but they also acknowledge uh, the limitation of this study for excluding qualitative uh, work or qualitative materials. Their studies were they showed insufficient studies dealing with the effects of HRM on health-related well-being and performance. All right, so this is the heart of this presentation, the quality of evidence, because from here, I'll make my argument about the selection of the Menezes and Kelleher, why I'm doing so. In about a slide or two, especially the next slide is very important, which is where I lay out the criteria used and how I was able to weigh the different articles and how I derived my conclusion. So this particular slide and the next one are very important. They're very crucial to this presentation. So I use three criteria based on Gore's 2007 weight of evidence article. Number one, generally appropriate research methods. In the case of the Menezes, they use aggregative systematic review. Methods appropriate to the research question. The inquiry was about flexible work arrangement and performance. Evidence appropriate to the research question. The evidence was, in the case of Menezes, the evidence was segmented to answer the research question. With respect to Van der Waals, Powell, and Veldhoven, methods appropriate to the research question, the authors examined two competing perspectives. Theirs, like I've said before, theirs was more of an inquiry. It was more explorative than definitive. They explored the impact of mutual gains perspective and conflicting outcomes perspective in measuring employee well-being. Was the evidence appropriate to research question? Well, they used only quantitative evidence. Here I enumerate the criteria used and I line up the articles side by side, and this is perhaps the most important slide in the entire presentation. I use weight of evidence by Gore, and the criteria are listed here on the right hand side of this slide. For example, when it comes to the evidence appropriate to the research question, the article, the Menezes and Kelleher article looked at the performance related outcomes both from individual and firm level. This included measures of financial performance, productivity, labor turnover, absenteeism, firm commitment, and job-related well-being. Here they rate medium. But compare that with Van der Waals, Powell, and Veldhoven. The article used the three related concepts of HRM, employee well-being, and organizational performance to investigate whether mutual gains perspective or confident outcomes perspective provides a better description of the role of employee well-being. With respect to locus innovation, I rate them low in terms of importance and applicability. Driving findings through scientific method. Well, here I enumerate some of the key areas that are identified in the articles. Authors clearly state the research question. The authors clearly delineated their exclusions and why, and the publications, the sample size. Here, I support my recommendations from systematic reviews for locus innovation. This is further support, and it shows evidence-based practice is a paradigm for making decisions that integrate the best available research evidence. High-level decisions are strategic decisions regarding an organization's mission, vision, and competitive strategy, which applies to locus. Systematic reviews are preferred to management fads because they use replicable, scientific, and transparent processes which minimize bias through exhaustive literature review. The case for the managers continues from here on, and these are all additional support for the recommendation. Thank you.